Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to paint some delicious Christmas cupcakes, and I'd much rather paint them than bake them for two reasons. For one, the calories, there's no calories in painting, and two, a painting is forever. You bake some cupcakes, you make a big mess, they get eaten, you got nothing to show for it. You always have that painting. If you would like to learn how you can save $50 on an annual subscription to Graphicstock, click the link in the video description or visit graphicstock.com/holidays and you can get that deal. I love using photos from Graphicstock because as an instructor, sometimes I want to show you the photo because we're trying to get a certain technique, and it's so handy if I can pull that photo up on screen and you can see exactly where the shading is or exactly the texture that I'm trying to show you. And I can do that with my Graphicstock subscription. Once you pay that fee, you can use the photos however you like. You can put them on your blog, you can use them in your videos. It's super handy and it's pretty affordable too. So go check out the link in the video description or visit graphicstock.com/holidays to save $50 on your subscription. Now let's go to the table and I'll show you how to paint those cupcakes. This is the photo we're going to paint from today. This is of course from Graphicstock, and I've had this painting, or this photograph rather, in my folder of painting ideas for quite a while, and I just really liked it. And I guess I was kind of on the fence on whether I was going to do a tutorial on it because I didn't know if people would really enjoy seeing it, but the more I looked at it, the more I really thought it would make a nice tutorial. So that's what we're going to use today. I will put the pattern on my blog for you to trace that if you want to. As you can see, I really scaled it back. Instead of putting everything in there, I put the pine cone, which I thought was kind of pretty, and an in-focus cupcake, and then an out-of-focus cupcake. So this is going to be the star of the show, this cupcake in the middle, but then we're going to have some textures and colors in the background to kind of just to kind of give it a little bit of depth, because when you're working with a still life, it can be difficult to get that sense of perspective and depth. So I've taped my paper down. I was just wetting it to make sure that that it was going to give me that nice white border. And what I'm doing now is just I'm going to wet the entire paper, and I'm going to put in a very soft wash. The thing when you're working with watercolor and layers, which is what we're going to do today, we're going to do a fairly detailed painting, is you want to kind of unify everything at the beginning, and then we're going to be working light to dark. There are some points we're going to put some dark color in just to establish values, but for the most part we're going to be working light to dark. So what you want is a nice uniform sheen across your paper. And I'm going to grab some ultramarine blue, and I'm using my Mission Gold palette. I really like the size of this palette because I can keep it pretty much all on screen for you, which is really handy. And I also want to get the other colors I plan on using today. I plan on using some nice bright yellow. This is PY65. It's kind of like a Indian yellow. It's just a really nice warm yellow. And I want some, I think some burnt umber or burnt sienna. I don't care for the Mission Gold burnt sienna that much because it's kind of got a green gold base to it. So I'm going to start with those colors. I know I'm going to need some red, so I think I'll go ahead and grab some. This is kind of like just a neutral, like almost like a naphthol red there, and I just want to kind of get those colors right off the bat. I'm going to start in with my blue. I'm just going to get a little bit up here, and you can see my brush isn't completely clean because it's picking up some of that red, but that's okay because I want to have a unifying color in there. I'm going to add a little bit of the burnt umber to it, and that's going to give me some kind of gray. This burnt umber is PBR7, which is a very customary brown pigment that's used in burnt umber and burnt sienna. I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow into that brown and kind of bring that down here a little bit. A little more of the blue to gray it up a little bit. I'm going to try to avoid painting too much in that front cupcake, but I don't mind getting the color on the objects that are not the center of attention. I don't want to get anything that's like not really going to match, so I'll do like kind of this yellow in the frosting area of the in behind cupcake, and do a little bit of the brown in the cake area. And I can also grab a little bit of that brown and put it into the pinecone area too, and that will be kind of like the lightest areas of that. And let's see, I think I'll do some super light yellow, very watery. The Mission Gold paints are super vibrant, so you do have to be kind of careful with them. I'll do a little bit of that kind of in the frosting area here. That will just save me a little work down the road. That in there. And I could put a little of that in the wrapper as well, because that's going to be really light. And I'll grab a little bit of that brown and just put a little bit in the cake area. These are going to dry nice and soft, so I'm not really concerned about any hard edges or anything weird. If I do see any puddles or any hard edges, I'll just go with my dried off brush. I just wipe it on a paper towel to take off the extra moisture, and I'll go in and just soften any edges that I think look a little harsh. So now I'm going to let this dry, and we will come back and we will start our first layers. Now that the background's dry, I want to go in and start working on this cupcake in the background. I think that it's nice if you have a kind of an area on your painting you can start in on that isn't the focal point, because it can be a little nerve-wracking to get in there and paint that focal point area. So I am just going to paint the area here that's going to be the cake. And as long as I am careful where I put my water, the paint is only going to go where the water is. So I'm just dabbing in this color. This is that burnt umber. You can use burnt sienna. PBR7 is the pigment name. And I'm just dabbing some of that in. I'm keeping it a little darker up towards the top. And then I think I'm going to add a little yellow ochre. Let me see what that yellow ochre looks like. Dab some of that in there. I like yellow ochre. It's a very useful color. So even though I didn't use it in the wash, I think I will add some of that in now. And the reason I'm dabbing it is because I want that cakey texture. Now if I want a little more texture, I can crumple up a paper towel or a tissue, and I can just gently kind of stamp in there and lift up some, and it will leave behind a little bit of texture. It will take up some of your pigment though, so just kind of keep that in mind. Now I'm going to skip to another part of the cupcake. I am going to skip up to the fondant leaves here, and I'm going to wet those, and we are going to do some green. And I'm going to grab some sap green and mix it in with a little bit of that ultramarine, because I think that the sap green on its own is just too vibrant for this. And I'm just going to let that color float around in there. And I want the illusion of ripples in the fondant, so I am going to go in with a little bit more blue and kind of add that where it appears the bend is in the fondant. And I'm doing this wet into wet because I want that matte, I want that to have that matte texture. I want it all blended. I don't want any hard edges. There. And then we will go over here and we'll wet this guy. Watch out for beads of water on your brush, because if that slides down your brush as you're going, that's going to make a mess, and it could leave a big water stain on your paper. This one, I want this to be fairly light, and then I'll be glazing over a shadow on the edge of the leaf later, because it's got a little shadow on the edge. You can see here, see that shadow on the edge? So I'll be glazing that on later. And then this little guy back here, you can barely see him, so I'm just going to paint, like with a leftover paint on my brush, I'm just going to paint him in just like that. There we go. Now if you have any puddles, what you want to do, again, just like we did in the background, is just dry your brush off and set it in the puddle and lift it up. And that way you'll be able to take off the extra paint and water without leaving a white spot. If you blot with a paper towel, you'll leave a little white spot and some texture like we did on purpose with the cake. Now I'm going to skip over to the pine cone, and the tips of the pine cone are light, and that's kind of like what our wash is. So the other colors I need to get is that reddish brown in there, and I need my darkest darks. But I think I'm going to do the reddish brown first, that you can kind of see on the insides of some of those areas. So I'm going to take that red that we used, And I'm gonna take that brown, see, reddish brown. We make it the same way it seems like we would, and then if it's too bright, I'll grab a little bit of that green mix, and that will tone it down, because green is the opposite of red, and it will make a nice, it'll neutralize it. So I'm just gonna go in, I'm just painting around the tips that are gonna be really light, and I am bringing in those little scales, I think that's what they're called, scales of the pine cone into the center. Now it wouldn't hurt if you just painted everything, but the deep shadows, because we can paint the dark over that, but we do need to preserve the lights. So just make sure if you're going in and you're painting around that you don't paint on top of our light areas that we sketched out. Again, refer to the photo or refer to my sketch on my website for that. I'm not going to go in and do everything just because it's kind of a waste of paint and a waste of time. I'm just going to go in and get the areas where I know there's some of that lighter brown, lighter reddish brown. Just go ahead and put that in. And then I can go in with the dark later. I think, well, you know, we could do that right now. Let's take that brown. We'll make a good puddle of it because we need quite a bit of it. And we're going to add some ultramarine blue to that. Try not to get too much water in your paint. Blot your brush off if you find you're getting way too much water. Just wipe your brush off with a paper towel so you don't add a bunch of water to it. So I'm going in and I'm adding my darker color here where it's more in the shadow. So it's lighter up here because the light can get in those little scales and light it up, but down lower it can't. The light's not traveling that far down, so we end up with the darker areas. And truth be told, I think I have a little too much water in my mix, but I can go and glaze some more shadows over it later if I need to. This is kind of the out of focus part still. This is the stuff in the background, so I'm really not too concerned with it. But it's better to get it in there right off the bat if you can. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry. Kind of reminds me of a Christmas tree with snow on the boughs, doesn't it? All right, so we've kind of gotten our feet wet a little bit, getting comfy. Now we can start working on this, and I think I'm gonna start with the wrapper because it's not touching anything else that's wet. And I'm gonna go ahead and get my ultramarine blue with a little of that brown, make a nice, like, kind of gray, a cool gray color, very, very light. You see on my palette, it's very light there. And I'm going to go ahead and glaze, just give everything a color, like a shade of that. Just give everything a wash. You really have to look when you're painting. You really have to look and see what undertones you see. I can see that it's a white wrapper, but I can see the undertones, and then it's got definitely more of like a gray, like a cool gray undertone, so that's why I'm mixing it up. And I like to use the colors that I've already used because it just gives me a much more natural look. Now we do have some of that cake color from the other cupcake that we just painted, so we will be able to go in and add a little bit of that in there, like from the bottom where you don't see so much of the wrapper. And then, I mean, the goal is not to copy the painting exactly. I'm gonna grab a little bit of that cakey color. The goal is to, you know, create artwork that is inspired by, but we can definitely put our own spin on things. A little more yellow ochre in there, that's a little dark. I'm using cotton paper. That's another thing that's really helpful if you are working on a painting where you're going to put a lot of glazes and layers, because it doesn't, it absorbs the paint a little bit and it lets you layer on top without lifting up all the paint that you already put down. So it is kind of helpful. It also can take a little bit more abuse, meaning you can like scrub it and it's not going to fall apart and pill and give you those little icky balls of paper. And remember, your paint will dry a little bit lighter, especially if you've used a lot of water. There. So that can dry. That's just layer one. That's not how it's going to end up looking. It's just how it's looking right now. Now I want to mix up a nice frosting color. I like that yellow ochre. but I feel like I need some of the other yellow too, and maybe even a little bit of that brown and red. I want a nice rich frosting color. And I just want to make sure it's got that warmth to it. The yellow ochre in this set has a bit of a green undertone to it, so I got to make sure I have a red to balance it out. Okay, that's a little on the dark side. The yellow on these cupcakes are quite yellow. I don't want them quite that yellow, so I did kind of dull them down a little bit by mixing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go in and actually put some of the darker colors in. That's I know it's darker than what it is in the photo, but I want to make sure I can kind of see where my shadows are. So I'm starting just by putting in these beads of lines of color, and then I'm going to be spreading it out. I know it seems a little bold, but it'll be fine, trust me. Okay. So I've got quite a few colors in there, and I rinse my brush and just kind of use my fingers to pull off the extra water because I don't want my brush super dry, and then I'm just going in along those edges and softening out my lines. This almost looks like a caramel frosting now instead of vanilla, doesn't it? That shadow under that little bit of fondant leaf. You can bring that shadow down under that fondant leaf as well. And it just doesn't take very much paint. And that's the thing about artistic expression. If you want to have a darker icing or different color altogether, you can do that. Just softening up a little bit here. All right, I'm going to go back in with my color. There's more. It's more highlighted over here, but I still want to have some nice color. I really want this to stand out from the other cupcake, so I want that to have much more contrast. I'm just kind of imagining those lines going beyond the fondant there and getting my colors in. I'll use different parts of the brush. If I want to smooth an edge, I'll use the edge of the brush so it can carry that pigment and water across and give me a more natural look. I'm doing a little shadow to those berries. Anything that looks too bold, you can go and just brush some water over it and it will soften it up. Okay. Now I think we're going to skip over here and we're going to do that cupcake wrapper, very similar to how we did that one. Let's go ahead and wet it. We don't have to be very particular because this is our kind of out of focus in the background cupcake. Just make sure that edge there is fairly dry, or leave a little gap so you don't end up smearing your paint in between. Doing the gray that we mixed up top, and we're doing the cakier color on the bottom. Had to widen that up. I went a little out of the lines. That's okay. All right, now we can go on to the berries on this cupcake. So I'm going to go right in with that red that we have used already because we want to keep using the same colors. And I'm going to paint them in. Just mind if they're tucked behind of like a lump of frosting, make sure that you don't paint the frosting. You just kind of paint the part of the berry you can see. And just make sure if it's touching anything else that you've already painted that is dry. Now to give that a little highlight, you can use a Q-tip if you have one, or you can just kind of wrap your paper towel around your finger and just give it a little dab up at the top or on one side. It'll look, you don't have to be too careful about it, it will look fairly natural, but getting that nice round somewhere in there gives it that sense of roundness, obviously. There. I like to do little tricks like that. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it does give you the results that you're after. And now I'm just gonna like touch that with the back of my hand. It feels like this is dry enough that I could go in and work on the cake area. Clean my brush off, and I think I got a little bit of wet paint there. I think I'm gonna actually go ahead and paint in dry, right on dry paper. I'm gonna take my burnt umber. If that line starts feathering, it means your frosting is still a little wet. So it's not what you want. If that happens, just kind of take a break and blot it, take a break and come back in a few minutes. Now, I'm going to keep this edge wet. See how I'm just kind of wiggling that around, keeping that edge wet, and then I'm going to pick up some of my yellow ochre colors. You can use straight yellow ochre if you have a normal yellow ochre. The yellow ochre in here is a little odd, so I've got to pick it up with a little red to negate the green undertones in it. So if you are using the Mission Gold Perfect Pan Set, keep that in mind. And I'm just kind of quickly going through and painting the edge. This brush has a nice sharp point, so I can get in there into those little divots in the cupcake waxy wrapper there, the little folds, pleats. As long as you keep that edge wet, you keep working on that wet edge, you shouldn't get streaks. It should be pretty, it should stay pretty smooth. All right, and we can always add more shadow after, so that's fine. We're going to keep that like that. Now I think we can work on the berries and the fondant leaves here. So I think I'll start right off with the berries. I am going to go right in and pick up that color. I'm not wetting it first because you don't really need to if it's a small area. And I am going to paint in each of these. Hopefully, yeah, frosting should be plenty dry on this one. Remember, we're going to be doing more detail on this front cupcake, so and we're going to be doing much less on the one in behind, so that this one will appear to be closer to us and give us a little perspective. I'm going ahead and adding some shadow, just adding a little more color to the bottom to ground it and give it a little more shadow. There, and I think I will give it a little highlight on that front one at least anyway, wrapping it around my finger and just pressing. It just helps that little gumdrop look a little rounder. There. And we'll let that dry, and we're going to move on to the fondant there, and I'm going to mix up my color. Add a little yellow in that. A little more blue. I just want to knock back the intensity on that color. It's a little bright. That might be a bit dark. I'm going to start that up here. That darker color. And then keeping that wet edge, I'm going to go pick up some of the color on its own there. I think that will work. Just keep kind of, you can pull some of that first color that we mixed down if you need to. Like if you find that you're getting like a really hard edge. Need a smidgen of water there. You want to avoid puddles, is what you want to avoid. If you get a puddle, you're going to end up with a backwash. or watermark. You can go back if you do need to go disturb some of that first layer and the first color you put where it's starting to dry. Just go in and disturb everything if you have to do that, because that way everything can kind of dry at the same rate. There. And so we're going to do that over here, same deal. You want those edges sharp where the icing is. You do want those edges nice and hard. On this foreground one anyway. And we can only just see like a little sliver of color from this in the back. You have to be careful around those red berries. If they're still wet, you're going to end up with some feathering. But I want to put that in there because the green's going to make the red look brighter. There. All right, now we can go back and we can work on the icing on the back cupcake. We're going to do the same thing. Just blotting out, I have a little puddle there, just wanted to get rid of that. I think we actually might want to put like a little bit of a highlight on our leaves too here, so they have that little bit of a ripple. There we go. I know it's a little harsh, but we're not done yet. Alright, for the in behind cupcake, we're going to do the same thing as we did on the foreground one. But we don't need to put quite as much detail. Oh, I dropped some water there. You got to be careful about dropping water on your background because you can have some watermarks if you're not careful. So I'm going way softer and easier back here. I'm not worrying too much about it. I'm just getting some color in, suggesting some ridges in the icing, and that's pretty much it. Because I don't want this to be as focused and detailed as the foreground one. So that's all I'm going to do to that. Now I'm going to work on the cupcake wrapper here because that's nice and dry. So I am going to grab some brown, a little bit of the ultramarine blue, and I'm going to start here at the bottom and just pull up some of those creases and pleats. I want to pull in some more cakey colors, so I'm going in with the brown, that cakey color that I mixed in there, and adding some of that in there because I don't want it to be too dark. With those subtle blends, that's what helps make it look realistic. Drag in from the tip of a crease and just kind of pull it down, because a lot of times it's the creases that are touching the cupcake, and where they're touching, that makes the wax paper more translucent. You see more of the cake color coming through. Anytime if you're not sure, just stop, stand back, or give your picture a little break, and when you come back you usually see it with better eyes. I feel like my my wrapper needs to be a little wider over there, so I'm going to go ahead and fix that right now. Making some more of that gray with the blue and the burnt umber, ultramarine blue, burnt umber. And I'm just feeling like this needs to be wider. In the photo there's like a pine cone in the way, so it's hard to see what's happening there, but there is a really, the wrapper's so light it blends into the background, so now that I'm looking at that I'm like there's just not enough stuff on that end of the cupcake, so now I'm just going in with a wet brush and blending it. So see, I think a lot of people think watercolor is just really difficult because you can't change your mind if you make a mistake. You totally can. Just try to find a way to blend it in with the other stuff you've been doing. There, I think that's better. I feel like it has a little bit more of substance there. We're also going to be working with some shadows. We're going to need shadows on the table, otherwise our cupcakes are just floating around in space, and that's not good. So we're going to do some ultramarine blue, burnt umber. We're going to make ourselves a nice gray shadow color. And this will work out because it's colors we already were using. If you need it grayer, add a little more blue. Okay. No, the shadows aren't super hard. If you look at the photo again, our shadows are fairly soft. They're darkest up next to an item, right? They're darkest right next to an item, and then they fade out, okay? So they're not... they're very gentle. So there's a couple different ways we can achieve this. I'll start up here and show you on this one. I think that's dry enough. Yeah. So you can start by picking up color. You can work on dry paper. And remember about the wet edge? I was telling you, keeping that edge wet. Okay, so we go in and we put in our shadow color. Light's coming this way. Okay, our shadow's going to be darkest next to the object. I gotta be careful because I did just paint that wrapper, so I gotta be careful there. Okay, so I'm just kind of pulling it out and I'm running out of paint, and that's alright. Now I've just rinsed my brush off and I'm pulling that wet edge over more. Completely clean my brush, blot it so I don't have a wetter brush than I do paper, and then I'm just softening that last edge. You have to be careful though, because especially if you're working on a wood pulp paper, you might just end up lifting what you have underneath, and then that could give you some kind of weird halo marks, and that's not necessarily what you want. I think the wrapper might have been a little wet there because my shadow's kind of going up into the wrapper, but I might have just dropped some water there. That might have been why. Okay, so that's one way you can do your shadow. And we did a background item so that we didn't have to worry if it wasn't perfect. The other way is a little bit less scary sometimes, and that's when we wet the area of the thing we want to shadow. So if I wet under this pine cone, and I'm going to wet out beyond where I want that shadow to go, so I'm going to pull it down near this cupcake. I'm just wet a little bit beyond, because this is going to give us a nice soft edge shadow. So the key is here, we're going to add paint to this, the same color we mixed, but we are not going to let it, go out all the way to that edge. We're just going to put enough paint in there that it can kind of float out on its own. And I apologize for the furnace. What I'm going to do is finish the shadow, and then I will pause the camera and we will continue on after the furnace is shut off. There's not much I can do about it. It's just getting cold here in Maine, so we get the furnace noise. I'm just going to soften that out, and then you can blot it a little bit if you feel like it's going too far. Alright, so let that dry, and then we will come back and add the shadow to the foreground. And now we're going to do the shadow on the front, and I am going to do it the same way we did the one on the pine cone, because I think it's a little easier, and especially if your background's painted already. So I'm wetting the paper. I'm kind of giving the shadow a path to follow, basically, is what I'm doing. And I am going to put in my gray. I'm going to put it darkest, like right here, because if the light's coming in from here, this is going to be the darkest area, this opposite area here. I think I need a little bit more blue in there. And we're just going to kind of guide that around. We want it darkest right where it's touching. And then we can pull it out. just rinsing my brush and blotting it because I have a little too much pigment on there, I think. This, as I mentioned before, these colors are very, very strong. And if you get too much, you can go ahead and blot it. The thing I really like about ultramarine blue and either burnt sienna or burnt umber is that you get a really pretty granulation, which is like this texture in the paper. It's from the paint as the pigment kind of settles out. It's so pretty, and I love that those colors do that. And I'm just gonna let that fade out to kind of nothing here. So I'm just gonna wet this area just so that it can kind of fade out to nothing there. Okay. Now I'm going to take some of my really light kind of yellowy brown here that I mixed. It's kind of like that leftover frosting color. Grab a little bit of that darker brown, but it's really, really light. I'm going to get any of these little tips of the pine cone that didn't get painted. They just kind of had a little bit of that, you could see the background wash on it, and I'm going to paint those in because they need to have a little bit of substance. I like to, whenever possible, go from the mix on my palette, you know, rather than right into fresh pans of color, because those are colors I know I've already used, so I know they're going to match and they're going to look good. You can leave some of the lighter colors showing as well. That will give you a little sparkle and highlight. And we are going to need a little bit more dark in this pine cone, but that's going to get us started. I'm just going to do a quick little dab for a highlight. Okay, now we're going to work back to front. We're going to do this cupcake. I almost called it a pine cone. Cupcake in the background there. Just making a little bit of a darker frosting color there. When in doubt, blot your brush because you can, it's better if you're not sure to have a little less paint on your brush. Some of these creases in the frosting, I'm just trying not to lay my hand down in that wet shadow wash that we just put in there. Be a little darker underneath that fondant. Also want to put a little bit of dark under the icing, a little bit more, because that's going to cast some shadow there. And you can also just dab tiny little specks because cake has that kind of spongy texture. So I kind of like to go in, put my shadow down, and then to kind of make the shadow kind of fade into the cake, I just kind of do these dabs so I get a little texture out of the deal too. There. And then grab some of this lighter color that we had used in the cake in the foreground. I'm just going to kind of flick up. I'm going to move my hand. I don't want to set my hand in the shadow from the foreground of a cupcake, and I'm just putting in some accent lines. Nothing too distinct. I just want to get that texture, that little bit of form, but not a lot of detail because I want the detail to be on the foreground cupcake. But I need something, you know, I need something there. Now we're going to go back in that darker green. So we're doing our sap green plus the ultramarine, and we're going to add some shadows onto the fondant. Right, any place that's under icing, we can also get the edge, some of the edges if we see some edge that's got a little bit of a dark texture to it. We can get that in there. Over here, this whole edge is darker. Gives us that kind of two-tone look from the shadow. I think I went a little low on that, but, and actually that berry's casting a little bit of shadow, so we're going to go ahead and put that in there. And I want a little bit in back here. And I think I'd have a little bit of shadow under the icing there. probably should have held off putting that shadow on the front cupcake because I keep wanting to stick my hand in it. And then if you want to add any other little shadows, you can go ahead and do that, or if you want to soften any shadows, just try not to disturb the paint underneath too much. But you can add shadows to show like a ripple in the fondant. Alright. And then on the berries, we're going to go in with that red. And just kind of put shadows along the bottom. You want to do it in like a curve so that you keep the shape of the berries. And just be careful around anything that you've just painted so that you don't end up smearing it or having the paint float into a wet wash. I think we're pretty well set up here. There. If you're using student grade paints, you might even want to go with a stiffer brush to mix this up so that you end up with a nice rich dark. And I'm going to go in here. So if I look at the photo again, see how dark it is in this, the deepest depths of the pine cone. That's what we're going to do there, okay? I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. So you're going to see a lot of dark right underneath the lightest, brightest parts of those, because of the tines, the scales, because you're seeing the depths of the pine cone. Make it less dark as you go up, so sparse as you go up. And you don't want it too much out to the edges because the light can get in there. You just want to really concentrate it in the center. There. I don't think we need much more than that, honestly. There. Oh, that's pretty. I think so anyway. Okay, now we're going to work again on that foreground cupcake and finish this picture off, because this is where all the detail is going to be. This one's for all the marbles right here in front. And we are going to start with the berries. We'll go in with our bright red. And we can add, well, first let's go in with the red, then we can darken it with a little ultramarine. Let's do this one in the back first. We're going to paint around our highlight, kind of. You can really get back any edges that you lost. While that's still wet, grab a little blue. And with that red, it's going to make almost a dull purple. We're going to put that at the bottom of our red, and that's going to give us a little contrast. Clean your brush before you go to the next one. Do the same thing over here. Try to leave a little gap between this and the other one so you don't have that shadow going in where you don't want it. And we're picking up the mixed purpley color for our shadow on this. If it seems like that center is a little too harsh, just clean your brush, blot it off, and just touch your brush along the edge there to help soften that. Alright, we're going again with this one in the front. Working back to front, it just kind of helps you get a little practice, so when you do get to the foreground one, you are all set to go. You've got all the practice done. You can see how that purpley color we mix looks so dark, but it looks natural. Get too much, just blot your brush and go in and pick some of that up. And I'm going to soften the top of that just by cleaning my brush, blotting it. There. A nice natural look. And I can blot it some more if I lose too much highlight. Okay, so I feel like I want to do a little bit more of the frosting before I go into the leaves here. Oh, I think I'm going to grab a little bit of that. I'm going to add a little purple of that into that yellow that I mixed. Let's do that. Let's see what that looks like. Let's give me a nice brown. And I feel like I do want this to have kind of a little bit of like a caramel color. So I want to make sure I have shadow under the leaves. And I can blot my brush, and I can just go right along the edge of any of those marks I've made and soften them out if I need to. And you can have your frosting more yellow like it is in the photo. That's completely up to you. I just felt like I needed a little bit darker color there. But you know, personal preference. Do whatever you like to do. And if you feel like you want some white highlights, you can always go in with some white paint. It's nice to use the white of the paper if you can, but you know, sometimes it doesn't work out. Do what's right for your picture. Now I'm looking at the cakey part here. I think I like the wrapper just fine. I think I want that little more texture in the cake, so I'm going to go in with the burnt umber. And I'm going to kind of do what I did on the one in back. I'm going to, hopefully the icing is dry enough there. I'm going to add in my brown. And then I'm going to dab get the texture. Just make sure that line is nice and sharp and coming right up to the icing, because you want that shadow to be right under the icing. Okay, that gives it a lot of weight, I think. Now I feel like I want to, now that I look at that and I look at the wrapper, I feel like the wrapper needs to be a little bit darker. So what I'm doing, I'm just grabbing a little bit of that dark color we use in the pinecone, and I'm just going to do a very, very light slice along the bottom. And then I'm going to drag up just some little pleats. And I'm making the line shorter as I go across. So I'm getting most of my shadow, most of that definition across from where the highlight is, from where the light's coming in. I also did that same shadow there at the bottom of that cupcake wrapper. Now for this guy, I'm going to go again. I'm switching brushes to one that's not quite as pointy. And I'm taking that mix of the ultramarine blue and sap green, and I'm going to use that shadowy mix along the edge here where we have that thickness of the fondant we can see, and I'm going to add it up here under the icing. I'm going to add it over here on this thickness of the icing. And under this frosting there for a shadow. And I can even add a little bit in this ripple here. You do have to be careful not to lift the paint from underneath. You know, lift the original paint you put down. So it is a little tricky because this color, we did put that on pretty thickly, so it does want to lift it up a little bit, but not too bad. You can always fill in a little bit if you need to. This brush is also a little bit stiffer than the one we used before. I feel like I want that a little bit brighter there. Okay. Now the last thing that I like to do is actually go in with a much smaller brush, or a little smaller. These brushes are so pointy that I don't feel like I need to use, you know, many sizes, but I think I'm going to go into this smaller one, and I'm going to get some frosting color, maybe with a little bit more yellow in it, because I want it to kind of glow a little bit, a little red. And I think I'm just going to go in and put the brightest, kind of crispest, you know, details and edges in there, just to give it that little extra touch of something, extra touch of detail. I think I might need a little bit of the burnt umber in there. That red is really strong there. And yeah, you can kind of take your time with this and just get as many details in there as you want. You're not going to affect too much with a tiny brush, but I think that it really helps kind of sell the detail and sell the scene that you're trying to make. I love the look of the fluted frosting. And we're only doing this on this front cupcake because we don't want to we don't want all that detail in the background. We just want that in the foreground. You can go ahead and add any little shadows, like under berries, under the fondant. Any place you think you'd have a little bit, you'd see the icing a little bit darker, go ahead and put that in now. That's going to help give weight to those other objects. You can even glaze over some of your other lines and it will look really natural, like I'm doing there. You can always blot something if you make a mistake. Don't worry about that. And I feel like I want it a little bit darker in there, so I'm going to grab a little bit of that darker color that we've been using for shadows, which is the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and I'm going to add a little bit in there just because it feels like, because I made the frosting darker, it feels like I need a little bit more deeper shadow, and I might need that here and there throughout the picture too, just to kind of make the values agree. Go by the reference photo, but also kind of go by what other colors you've chosen to use, and see if you need to make any other adjustments that will make your picture look better. Alright, now it's just about done. I'm kind of feeling like I'd like to have a little bit more shadow on the foreground, so I am just going to do a very gentle shadow. I'm just taking my soft brush, adding some water to that shadowy mix. Maybe just a smidgen more ultramarine blue, and I am just going to apply it on top of what I've already done for a shadow, but I'm not wetting the area first because I just want to get something fairly soft. So I'm just going to wet the edges of that shadow and just kind of spread it. There. I just felt like sometimes after you get something painted, you realize, boy, it needs a little bit more shadow, and you don't quite realize it until after you've painted it. And just up in this corner, I want a little bit more because everything's really packed in tight there. So I want that to to have a little depth. And underneath this guy too, I'm gonna add in a little bit more shadow. And having that shadow behind the cupcake too is going to give it a little bit, push it to the foreground a little bit more. All right. There. And that pretty much does that. I think it really helps to have things in different levels of focus. If you feel like you want to go back and add a little more detail to the cupcake and back, you can. I think it looks nice to have that contrast. In fact, I'm thinking maybe a little bit of shadowing on the cupcake and back. So I'm taking some of that gray that we mixed and adding it to the icing color. And I think I'm actually just going to give that cupcake and back a little bit of a wash of that to kind of help maybe push it back a little bit more, because I feel like it's kind of encroaching forward a little bit. There's all kinds of little tricks. The more you paint, the more you'll know these little tricks you can do to help, you know, make one item stand out more than the others. Don't want a ton of detail. If you have everything detailed in a picture, then it looks very flat. And I can play with a little bit cooler color back there, having some of that gray with a little more ultramarine blue on that cupcake and back, and that will help pull that away a little bit too. So I'm going to spread that out because that's a little bit dark. All kinds of little tricks you can learn, tricks of the trade. And then all you got to do is sign your name and you are done. I want to thank you for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if so, please check out our sponsor graphicstock.com/holiday. You can save $50 off an annual subscription, and I find their subscription so useful. I am always looking for reference photos there for paintings or different photos I need for my blog articles. It's a wonderful subscription to have because you don't have to worry about the photos that you're using. You know you have permission to use them, so it just takes a level of worry off of your plate when you are making any content for online. Thank you so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up if you like this video, and until next time, happy crafting.